Welcome back, dear listeners, to our quiet corner of history, where we delve into the often unspoken realities of lives lived long ago. Tonight, we embark on a journey into one of humanity's darkest chapters to confront a system so vast, so brutal, and so profoundly dehumanizing that its echoes still resonate with a chilling power. We're going to explore what it might have meant to be ensnared in what many consider the absolute worst time in history to be born, or to become, a slave. We're peeling back the layers of time to witness not just hardship, but the systematic stripping away of freedom, identity, and humanity itself. Now, as this is a journey we often take together into the deeper, sometimes more somber, corridors of the past, and I know many of you listen as you wind down your day. I invite you now to find your comfortable spot. Perhaps settle into bed, put your phone to the side, dim the lights if you can, and just let the world around you begin to fade. Allow your mind to travel back with me as we prepare to delve deep into this difficult but important story. Let the sounds of your present recede as we open a door onto a past that demands to be remembered. Let's begin. And as we embark on this new series, if you find value in these explorations, in understanding the depths of human experience throughout history, please do consider hitting that subscribe button to join our community. It truly helps these stories reach those who seek them. I'm always fascinated to know where our global audience is joining us from. So please, drop a comment below letting us know what country you're tuning in from. Your presence from around the world is a constant inspiration. And looking ahead, what other historical roles, civilizations, or unfortunate predicaments do you think deserve to be with us in next nights? I'm always on the lookout for new avenues of historical misery to explore. So please, share your ideas and suggestions in the comments below. I read every single one. Right then. The air is warm. The sun beats down on a land vibrant with life. But a shadow is falling, a shadow carried on the sails of strange, tall ships. Imagine your world is one of sun-drenched earth, of familial bonds, of intricate traditions passed down through generations. You live in a village nestled perhaps in the verdant hinterlands of West Africa, sometime in the centuries when the great European hunger for labor in the New World began its insatiable growth. Your days, while not without their own hardships and local conflicts, are your own. You understand the rhythms of the seasons, the language of your people, the sacred stories that explain the world around you. You have a name given by your parents, a place within your kin group, a sense of belonging under the vast African sky. You might be a farmer, tending yams or millet, a skilled artisan, weaving intricate cloths or forging iron tools, a mother, a father, a child full of youthful exuberance. Life is immediate, tangible, rooted in the soil and the community that has always been your universe. Then, the whispers begin, or perhaps they have been there for a while, like the distant rumble of an approaching storm. Tales of strange, pale-skinned men arriving in massive canoes with wings on the coast. Stories of neighboring villages raided, of people vanishing, spirited away by these men or by rival tribes who trade captives for foreign goods. Iron bars, colorful beads, alcohol, and most terrifyingly, firearms that shift the balance of local power. A knot of uneased titans in your community. The elders consult the spirits. The warriors keep a sharper watch, but the shadow, once cast, is relentless. One day, it falls directly upon you. It might be a sudden, brutal raid on your village. The terrifying shriek of war cries, the crackle of burning thatch, the chaos of screams and desperate flight. Armed men, some of your own people perhaps, now allied with or working for the slavers, or the pale-faced strangers themselves, burst through the defenses. You see your loved ones cut down or seized alongside you. The struggle is brief, brutal, hopeless against their superior weaponry or numbers. Or perhaps your capture is more insidious, an ambush while you are tending your fields, a kidnapping while you travel between villages, a betrayal by someone you trusted. The moment of capture is the moment your old life shatters. You are bound, your hands tied cruelly behind your back, often with rough vines or strips of hide that cut into your flesh. You are prodded, shoved, herded like an animal. If you resist, you are met with savage blows from a musket, butt, or the flat of a machete. You are stripped of any small possessions, any token of your former life. Your name, your identity, begins to be erased, replaced by the brutal reality of your new status. Captive, property, a piece of human cargo. Then begins the agonizing march to the coast. This journey, often lasting weeks or even months, is an ordeal designed to break your spirit as much as your body. Chained or yoked to other captives in a long, sorrowful coffle, you are forced to walk endless miles under a pitiless sun, through dense forests, across arid plains. Food is scarce and of the poorest quality, a handful of grain, a few rotten yams. Water is even scarcer, doled out in meager, insufficient rations. The guards, whether your own people turned slavers or the direct agents of the European traders, are brutal, their whips and clubs quick to fall on anyone who stumbles, falters, or shows any sign of defiance. Sickness is rampant. Dysentery, fevers, infected wounds from the chains or the journey itself claim many lives along the way. You see fellow captives collapse by the wayside, left to die where they fall, their bodies food for scavengers. The weak are culled, for only the strong are deemed worthy of the horrors to come. The psychological torment is immense. You are surrounded by the sounds of weeping, of despair, of the dying. You are cut off from your family, your community, your ancestors, your gods. The world as you knew it has ceased to exist. Finally, after an eternity of suffering, you reach the coast. But this is no deliverance. Here, you are herded into even more terrifying structures. The slave forts, the castles like Elmina or Cape Coast, or the crude holding pens known as barracoons. These are prisons of filth and despair, stone and wood edifices built to contain human misery on an industrial scale. You are crammed into dark, airless dungeons or open stockades with hundreds, sometimes thousands, of other captives from myriad different tribes and regions, speaking languages you do not understand. The stench of unwashed bodies, of excrement, of sickness, of death, is overpowering, a physical assault on your senses. Here, you are subjected to further indignities, branding with hot irons, marking you as the property of a specific European trading company or individual, intrusive physical examinations by ship surgeons looking for defects that might lessen your value. You are merely a commodity, inspected like livestock before auction. The constant sound is the crashing of the ocean waves against the shore, a sound that once might have spoken of freedom or the vastness of the world, but now only whispers. Of the terrifying, unknown journey that awaits you across that endless expanse of water in the bellies of those monstrous winged canoes. You watch them, anchored offshore, symbols of your stolen future. And as you lie in the squalor of the barracoon, your body aching, your spirit battered, you know that this is only the beginning of why it will suck so profoundly and utterly to be a slave in this new, brutal world order. The true voyage into darkness has yet to begin. ***, you lie in the suffocating squalor of the coastal barracoon, a human commodity awaiting shipment. The relentless crash of the Atlantic waves a constant, terrifying drumbeat heralding your doom. Days, or perhaps weeks, blur into a nightmarish cycle of meager rations, rampant disease, and the brutal indifference of your captors. Then, one day, a new kind of commotion erupts. The great winged canoes, the slave ships, have anchored offshore, their dark silhouettes stark against the horizon. This is it, the moment your captors have been waiting for, and the moment you have dreaded with every fiber of your being. The true voyage into darkness is about to begin. You are herded from the barracoon, perhaps for the last time feeling African earth beneath your feet, however sullied it has become. Chained together in long lines, you are forced into smaller boats or canoes that ferry you through the churning surf towards the waiting ships. The fear is a physical thing, a coiling serpent in your belly, a metallic taste in your mouth. Many have never seen such a vast expanse of water, let alone such enormous, alien vessels. The sight of the ship itself, its towering masts, its complex rigging, the strange, pale faces of the sailors leaning over the rails, their expressions often a mixture of callous indifference and brutal anticipation, is enough to induce sheer terror. Some captives, seeing the hopelessness of their situation, might make a desperate, final attempt to escape, throwing themselves into the waves, preferring a quick death by drowning to the unknown horrors that await. Such attempts are usually met with brutal efficiency. A musket shot, a swung, or simply being left to the sharks. Once alongside the ship, you are prodded and forced up a narrow gangplank or rope ladder, your chains clanking, your heart hammering against your ribs. The deck of the slaver is a scene of organized chaos. Rough-voiced sailors shout commands in a language you don't understand. The crack of a whip is a common sound. And then, you are directed towards the hatchways, the dark, gaping maws leading down into the belly of the beast. The descent into the slave deck is a descent into hell itself. The stench hits you first, an overpowering miasma of stale air, unwashed bodies, vomit, excrement, blood, and the cloying, sickly sweet smell of diseases like dysentery, the bloody flux, which is already rampant. The space is shockingly, impossibly cramped. You are forced to lie down on rough wooden platforms or directly on the planks of the deck, packed so tightly against your fellow captives that you can barely move, often spoon fashion, head to feet, to maximize the human cargo. Men are usually separated from women and children, but the conditions are universally atrocious. There is often less than 3 feet of headroom between decks, meaning you cannot sit upright, let alone stand. You are effectively entombed alive, and the chains. You are shackled, often in pairs, leg iron to leg iron, sometimes wrist to wrist as well. These heavy iron manacles chafe your skin raw, the constant friction creating open, weeping sores that quickly become infected in the unsanitary conditions. The clanking of hundreds of chains is a constant, maddening soundtrack to your misery. The purpose of these chains is clear: to prevent rebellion, to prevent escape, to crush any last vestiges of resistance. The heat is unbearable, especially as the ship sails through tropical waters. With the hatches often battened down during rough weather or to prevent uprisings, fresh air is a distant memory. The atmosphere below deck becomes a suffocating, sweltering soup of human exhalations, disease, and the fumes from the overflowing latrine tubs. These tubs, usually just a few large buckets placed amongst the packed bodies, are often inadequate, quickly becoming fouled, their contents spilling and sloshing with the motion of the ship, further contributing to the unimaginable filth and the rapid spread of disease. Food, when it comes, is a meager, unappetizing slop, often boiled horse beans, yams, or rice, sometimes mixed with a little palm oil. It is doled out in communal tubs, eaten with your hands in the darkness and filth. The water is brackish, stale, and strictly rationed, never enough to quench the raging thirst brought on by the heat and sickness. If you refuse to eat, perhaps out of despair or a desire to hasten your own end, you are subjected to forced feeding. Your mouth is pried open with a horrifying instrument called a speculum oris, and the food is brutally shoved down your throat. Your captors need you alive, at least until you reach the slave markets of the New World. Your death en route is a loss of profit. Periodically, weather permitting, you and your fellow captives are forced up onto the main deck for what the slavers call exercise, or dancing the slaves. Stripped naked, you are made to jump, shuffle, or dance to the rhythm of a drum or the crack of a whip, while the sailors watch, often with amusement or contempt. This grotesque parody of activity is intended to keep your muscles from completely atrophying during the long weeks of confinement, to make you appear healthier and more saleable upon arrival. It is also an opportunity for the crew to inspect you, to identify the sick, and to further assert their brutal dominance. For the women among you, these forced appearances on deck often bring the added horror of sexual assault by the crew, a common and brutal reality of the Middle Passage. Disease runs rampant in these floating coffins. Dysentery, with its bloody, dehydrating flux, is the most common killer. Smallpox, measles, scurvy, from the lack of fresh food, and various fevers sweep through the packed, weakened bodies with devastating efficiency. The sick, the dying, and often the dead, are left, chained among the living for hours, sometimes days, before being unceremoniously dragged out and thrown overboard. The sight of bodies, sometimes still showing faint signs of life, being consigned to the waves, is a constant, terrifying reminder of your own precarious hold on existence. Mortality rates are staggering. often 15 to 25%. Of the human cargo perishes on each voyage, sometimes much higher if disease takes a particularly strong hold or the journey is prolonged by bad weather. The psychological torment is as profound as the physical. The utter despair, the grief for lost family and freedom, the constant terror, the dehumanizing brutality, the claustrophobia, the unending sounds of suffering. It all combines to create a living nightmare from which there is no escape. Some succumb to madness. Others choose the only way out they can see, attempting suicide by starvation or, if an opportunity ever arises, by throwing themselves overboard, seeking the cold embrace of the ocean rather than endure another moment in this floating hell. Acts of rebellion, though incredibly risky, do occur, desperate, doomed uprisings that are always brutally suppressed. The ringleaders made horrifying examples of to cow the rest. For weeks, sometimes months, this is your entire existence. Trapped in the stinking, lightless, suffocating belly of the ship, surrounded by death, disease, and despair, lurching across an endless ocean towards an unknown, terrifying future. Each sunrise, if you can even perceive it from below, brings not hope, but only the certainty of another day of unimaginable suffering. The voyage itself is a crucible designed to strip you of your will, your identity, your very humanity, to break you down into a compliant, saleable commodity. And as the ship finally, after an eternity of torment, approaches the distant shores of the new world, you know that while one circle of hell may be ending, another is surely about to begin. The weeks, or perhaps agonizing months, trapped in the suffocating, pestilential belly of the slave ship have finally, almost unbelievably, come to an end. Through a haze of sickness, starvation, and soul-crushing despair, you become aware of a change in the ship's motion, a different quality to the air, perhaps even the distant, longed-for scent of land. Then come the shouts of the sailors, a new urgency in their movements. Land, you have arrived in the new world. But this is no promised land, no haven after the storm. For you, and the other wretched survivors of the Middle Passage, it is merely the threshold of a new and perhaps even more brutal circle of hell. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. You are herded up from the stinking darkness of the hold, your eyes blinking painfully against the sudden, harsh sunlight. The fresh air itself is a shock, almost too clean, too pure for lungs accustomed to the fetid exhalations of the slave deck. Your legs, weakened by weeks of confinement and disuse, tremble beneath you. You look around at your fellow captives, and what you see is a gallery of human suffering. Emaciated bodies, skin stretched tight over protruding bones, many covered in sores, the vacant, hollow-eyed stares of those whose spirits have been all but extinguished. The stench of death and disease still clings to you all like a shroud, but your captors have no time for pity or recovery. You are cargo, and cargo must be made presentable for sale. Thus begins the grotesque ritual of preparation. You are brought onto the deck, or perhaps to a holding pen on shore, and subjected to a brutal, cursory cleaning. Cold seawater might be thrown over you, or you might be roughly scrubbed with coarse brushes, not for your comfort or hygiene, but to wash away the worst of the filth and grime that might offend potential buyers. Your hair, matted with sweat and vomit, might be crudely shaved or oiled. Palm oil, or some other greasy substance, is often smeared over your skin to give it a deceptive sheen of health, to hide the sores, the rashes, the marks of the lash, and the general pallor of sickness. If you are too weak from dysentery or other ailments, your captors might employ even crueler deceptions. The dying might have their ulcers filled with substances to temporarily conceal them, or be forced to ingest stimulants to give a fleeting appearance of energy. They might even, in a final, desperate act of commercial cynicism, use plugs of oakum to stop the telltale rectal discharge of the bloody flux, just long enough to get you through the auction. Your body is a commodity, and every effort is made to maximize its perceived value, however deceptively. You might be given slightly better food and more water in these few days before the sale, not out of kindness, but to plump you up, to make you appear a more robust and therefore more profitable investment. Then comes the day of the auction, the slave market. This is where your final vestiges of humanity are systematically stripped away in a public spectacle of utter degradation. You are herded, often still chained, into a yard or onto a platform, under the eager, appraising gaze of the planters, merchants, and overseers who have come to purchase new stock for their plantations, mines, or households. You are often paraded naked, or nearly so, regardless of age or gender, your body exposed to the critical, dehumanizing scrutiny of strangers. Potential buyers move amongst you, treating you not as a human being, but as livestock. They pinch your flesh to assess your muscle, force open your mouth to inspect your teeth, a key indicator of age and health, they believe. Examine your limbs for signs of injury or weakness. They run their hands over your body, checking for hernias, for whip scars, which might indicate a rebellious nature, or simply a previous owner's brutality, for any sign of disease that might have been missed by the initial grooming. Their touch is not gentle, it is rough, invasive, utilitarian. Their conversation, in their alien tongue, is about your strength, your breeding potential. If you are a woman, your likely lifespan under hard labor. You are an object, a tool, a beast of burden, your worth calculated in pounds of sugar, casks of rum, or cold, hard cash. The auction itself is a terrifying, bewildering experience. An auctioneer, his voice loud and commanding, extols your supposed virtues, your youth, your strength, your alleged resilience. Bids are shouted from the assembled crowd. You might be made to jump, to run, to lift heavy objects, to further demonstrate your physical capabilities. The fear is palpable, the humiliation absolute. Perhaps the most horrifying method of sale is this scramble. In this scenario, a fixed price is set per head, and at a given signal, the firing of a gun, the ringing of a bell, the buyers rush into the enclosure where you and your fellow captives are penned, seizing and declaiming whichever individuals they can lay their hands on. Imagine the terror of that moment. A frenzied mob of strange, powerful men descending upon you, grabbing, pulling, fighting over your body as if you were a piece of meat at a market stall. The weakest, the sickest, the children are often trampled or injured in the melee. And through all this, the constant, heartbreaking reality is the separation of families and kin. If you manage to survive the horrors of the Middle Passage with a spouse, a child, a sibling, or even someone from your own village with whom you shared a language and a bond of common suffering, the auction block is where these last, fragile connections are almost certain to be brutally, irrevocably severed. A mother's desperate pleas as her child is torn from her arms, the anguished cries of a husband and wife sold to different masters, destined never to see each other again. These are the sounds that echo through the slave market, a testament to the system's calculated cruelty. There is no consideration for human bonds, only for the cold calculus of profit. Once you are sold, you might be branded again, this time with the mark of your new owner, a fresh searing of your flesh to signify your new status as his property. You are then led away, often still in chains, by your new master or his overseer, towards an unknown plantation, an unknown life of forced labor, an unknown future filled with yet more hardship and despair. You have crossed an ocean, endured unimaginable horrors, only to arrive in a strange, hostile land where your body, your labor, your very life, now belong to another. The sun might shine here too, but for you, the darkness has only deepened. The auctioneer's hammer has fallen, or the frenzied scramble has concluded, and you, a dazed, terrified survivor of the Middle Passage, now bear the mark or the ownership of a new master. The brief, horrifying spectacle of the slave market gives way to the next stage of your Via Dolorosa, the journey to the plantation, mine, or household that will be your new prison, and the brutal process of seasoning, a euphemism for a period of calculated cruelty designed to break your spirit, acclimatize you to your new hell, and transform you from a newly arrived African into a compliant, productive slave, still chained, perhaps now in a smaller coffle with those bought by the same master. You are forced inland. This journey might be short, if your new place of torment is near the port city, or it could be another arduous trek lasting days or even weeks, deeper into the unfamiliar, often hostile, landscape of this new world. The sun beats down with a different intensity here. The vegetation is alien. The very air smells strange. You are prodded along by overseers on horseback, their whips cracking, their voices harsh with commands in a language you still barely comprehend. Exhaustion, dehydration, and the festering sores from your chains are your constant companions. Any sign of resistance, any slowing of your pace, is met with immediate, brutal correction. Finally, you arrive. Your new home. If it is a sugar plantation in the Caribbean or a tobacco or cotton estate in the Americas, your first sight is likely one of vast, cultivated fields stretching to the horizon, under a sky that seems too bright, too indifferent. To your suffering, you see the great house of the master, often opulent and imposing, a stark contrast to the crude, squalid huts that will be your dwelling. And you see other enslaved people, their bodies bent in endless toil, their faces etched with a weariness and despair that chills you to the bone, a horrifying preview of your own future. This seasoning begins almost immediately. This is a period of intense, deliberate dehumanization, designed to strip away your African identity, your will to resist, and to instill in you the absolute, unquestioning obedience demanded by the slave system. You are likely given a new name, a European name, Tom, sorry, John, Bess, another layer of your old self forcibly erased. Your own name, the one given to you by your parents, the one that connects you to your ancestors and your culture, is forbidden, beaten out of you if you dare to use it. You are thrust into unfamiliar, back-breaking labor, often far beyond your physical capacity, especially after the ravages of the Middle Passage. If it's a sugar plantation, you might be forced into the cane fields, cutting the thick, tough stalks under a blistering sun from dawn till dusk, the sharp leaves tearing at your skin, the air thick with a cloying sweetness and the buzz of insects. Or perhaps you are put to work in the boiling house, a hellish inferno of heat and steam, where the cane juice is processed into sugar, a dangerous, exhausting task. If it's tobacco or cotton, the endless stooping, planting, weeding, and harvesting will break your back and your spirit. The workday is relentless, often 12, 14, or even 16 hours long, driven by the overseer's lash and the relentless demands of production. There is no rest for the weary, only the brief, exhausted slumber of the night before the cycle begins anew. Language is another barrier, another tool of oppression. You must learn enough of your master's tongue, English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, to understand commands, to obey instantly. Failure to comprehend is often interpreted as defiance, inviting a savage beating. You pick up words and phrases through fear and repetition, a crude pidgin that allows for basic communication but further isolates you from those who speak different African languages among your fellow captives. Discipline is swift, brutal, and arbitrary. The whip is the ever-present symbol and instrument of the master's authority. You see it used constantly, for the slightest infraction, for not working hard enough, for a perceived insolent glance, or sometimes for no discernible reason at all, simply to instill terror and maintain control. Floggings that leave your back a raw, bleeding mass are common. Other, more sadistic punishments might be employed: branding, mutilation, the cutting off of an ear or a finger for repeated escape attempts, confinement in stocks or chains for extended periods, or being forced to wear heavy iron collars with projecting spikes. You learn quickly that your body is not your own. It is a tool, a piece of property, to be used, abused, and broken at the master's whim. Your living conditions are appalling. You are crammed into crude, windowless huts or barracks, often with dirt floors, little ventilation, and no sanitation. These slave quarters are overcrowded, breeding grounds for disease. Your bedding might be a pile of rags or straw on the bare earth. Privacy is non-existent. Your food rations are meager, monotonous, and often nutritionally deficient, typically a weekly allowance of cornmeal, salted fish, or pork of the lowest quality, and perhaps some yams or molasses. This is barely enough to sustain life under hard labor, let alone promote health. Clothing is similarly inadequate. A few rough Osnaburg shirts and trousers or shifts per year, offering little protection from the elements or the wear and tear of field work, Disease, already your companion from the Middle Passage, finds fertile ground in these new conditions. New tropical ailments for which you have no immunity, combined with malnutrition, exhaustion, and the psychological trauma of your enslavement, take a horrific toll. The seasoning period is notorious for its incredibly high mortality rates. Many newly arrived Africans, like yourself, die within the first year, from sickness, from overwork, from sheer despair, or from the direct brutality of their enslavers. You watch your fellow captives, those who survived the ocean voyage with you, sicken and perish one by one, their bodies unceremoniously dumped into unmarked graves. Each death is a stark reminder of your own precarious hold on life. Is there any hope? Any resistance? Hope is a dangerous, fragile thing in this environment. Outward defiance is usually met with overwhelming, crushing force. But perhaps, even in this abyss, small acts of resistance begin to form. A feigned illness to gain a day's rest, a deliberately slow pace of work when the overseer's back is turned, the preservation of fragments of your language and culture. In secret, a shared song of sorrow or defiance hummed quietly in the fields or the slave quarters at night. Or perhaps your focus narrows entirely to the primal, all-consuming need to simply survive, to endure this day, and then the next, in the faint, desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, there might be an end to this living hell. But as you collapse onto your miserable pallet at the end of another day of brutal labor and casual cruelty, that hope feels as distant and unattainable as the stars in the unfamiliar sky above your new prison. You are being seasoned, broken to the yoke, and the process is designed to annihilate everything that made you who you were. The brutal seasoning period, that fiery crucible designed to sear your African identity from your soul and brand you as compliant property, has, if you are among the grimly fortunate to survive it, finally run its course. You are broken in, yes, but perhaps not entirely broken. A core of something, a flicker of who you once were, might still smolder deep within, carefully shielded from the ever-watchful eyes of your masters. But now begins the long, grinding, soul-destroying reality of your everyday existence as a plantation slave in the New World. This is not a life of acute, novel terrors like the Middle Passage or the auction block. This is a life of chronic, relentless, monotonous misery, a slow death by 1,000 daily cuts. Imagine your days are now dictated not by the rhythms of your village or the cycles of your ancestral lands, but by the piercing shriek of the overseer's horn or the clang of a plantation bell, often well before the sun has even begun to paint the eastern sky. You stumble from your wretched, overcrowded hut in the slave quarters, a crude, windowless cabin, perhaps with a dirt floor, shared with several other souls, offering little protection from the elements and even less privacy. There is no gentle, waking, no quiet moment of contemplation. The day begins with the immediate, pressing reality of toil. Your labor is the engine that drives this entire system, and it is relentless, all-consuming. If you are on a sugar plantation in the Caribbean or Brazil, this is arguably the deadliest assignment. From dawn till dusk, and often well into the night during the harvest season, the zaffra or crop over, you are driven into the cane fields. The sun beats down with a merciless, tropical intensity. You cut the thick, tough cane stalks with a heavy machete, the sharp leaves slicing at your exposed skin, the air thick with cloying sweetness and swarming insects. You bundle the heavy cane, load it onto carts, and haul it to the mill. The work is back-breaking, performed at a furious pace under the constant threat of the driver's lash, the driver often an enslaved man himself, given a whip and a measure of brutal authority to extract maximum labor from his fellows. The sugar mill itself is a place of terror and danger. The massive rollers that crush the cane can easily catch a limb, maiming or killing you in an instant. And then there is the boiling house, a veritable inferno where the cane juice is heated in a series of enormous copper cauldrons to crystallize the sugar. The heat is unimaginable, the air thick with scorching steam and the fumes of molasses. Here, working often around the clock in shifts, you tend the fires, skim the boiling liquid, your body perpetually slick with sweat, your senses overwhelmed. A moment's inattention, a stumble, could mean a horrific scalding or a fall into a boiling vat. Sleep deprivation is constant. Exhaustion a given. If you are on a cotton plantation in the American South, the rhythm is different, but the brutality similar. The planting, the endless chopping of weeds under a scorching sun, and then the picking season, months of dragging heavy sacks through the fields, your fingers pricked raw and bleeding from the sharp cotton bolls, the daily quota always just beyond easy reach, ensuring the whip remains a constant motivator. Or perhaps it's tobacco, with its own demanding cycle of planting, topping, suckering, cutting, and curing in hot, smoky barns. Whatever the crop, your life is defined by it. Your body used as a machine to produce wealth for a master who sees you as little more than a particularly valuable beast of burden. Your food remains meager, barely enough to sustain such arduous labor. A weekly ration of cornmeal, perhaps some salted fish or pork of the lowest quality, molasses, and occasionally some sweet potatoes or yams. This is your fuel. If your master allows it, you might have a small patch of ground near your cabin, a provision ground, where you can cultivate a few vegetables in your precious free time on Sundays or late at night, to supplement your diet or perhaps even to trade for some small necessity. But this, too, is at the master's whim. Clothing is equally basic. A couple of shifts or pairs of trousers made from the coarsest Osnaburg or linsey woolsey cloth per year, often worn until they are literally rags falling from your body, offering little protection from the sun, the rain, or the cold. The system of control is absolute, built on a foundation of terror. The whip is the law. Every overseer, every driver, carries one, and it is used frequently and brutally for any perceived laziness, an impertinent glance, a moment of unauthorized rest, or simply to make an example. But flogging is just one instrument in the orchestra of punishment. Branding with hot irons, confinement in stocks or pillories for days on end, the wearing of heavy iron collars with projecting spikes to prevent escape or sleep, mutilation, such as the cropping of ears, or even more sadistic. Tortures are all part of the overseer's toolkit. And then there is the ultimate threat, the one that hangs over every enslaved person, being sold down the river, separated from your family, your community, your children, to an even harsher master in a distant, unknown place. This fear of arbitrary sale and family separation is a potent weapon of psychological control. Yet, even in this abyss, you strive to create a semblance of human life. Within the slave quarters, after the day's brutal labor is done, a fragile community might exist. You share stories from your homeland, whispered in your native tongues when the overseer is out of earshot. You create music with makeshift instruments, sing songs of sorrow, of defiance, of hope, however faint. You might try to form families, though these unions are not legally recognized and are always subject to the master's whim and the constant threat of forced separation. The love for your children, born into this same hell, is a fierce, aching thing, a desperate desire to protect them in a world where you have so little power to do so. Religion, too, can be a solace and a form of resistance. You might cling to the spiritual beliefs and practices of your ancestors, adapting them to this new, hostile environment. Or you might embrace the Christianity offered or imposed by your masters, finding in its stories of suffering and redemption a message that resonates with your own experience, often reinterpreting it in ways that speak to your yearning for justice and liberation. Secret prayer meetings, spirituals sung in the dead of night. These are acts of spiritual defiance, affirmations of your enduring humanity. But every day is a battle. Every sunrise brings the certainty of more toil, more pain, more degradation. You are not living. You are surviving, enduring, existing in a state where your body is not your own, your time is not your own, your children are not your own. Your worth is measured only in the profit you can generate. The sun rises on the cane fields, the cotton rows, the tobacco patches, and you, a seasoned slave, are driven out once more to feed the insatiable appetite of a system built on your sweat, your blood, and your stolen life. This is the daily grind, the relentless, soul-destroying reality of why it sucked, more than words can ever truly convey, to be a slave in this particular time and place. You have been seasoned, broken to the relentless, sun-up to sundown grind. Of plantation labor, your body a scarred testament to the overseer's lash, your spirit a carefully guarded ember against the crushing weight of hopelessness. You exist in a fragile community forged in shared suffering, your days a monotonous cycle of toil, meager rations, and the constant, gnawing fear of arbitrary punishment. But if you are a woman in this brutal system of chattel slavery, your experience of why it sucked carries an additional, uniquely horrifying set of burdens, a deeper, more personal violation that targets your very womanhood, your body, and your children. Your labor is often no different, no less arduous than that of the enslaved men. You are out in the fields under the same blistering sun, whether it's the endless rows of cotton that prick your fingers raw, the towering sugar cane that slices your skin, or the demanding tobacco plants that stain your hands and break your back. You hoe, you plant, you weed, you harvest, your muscles screaming, your body aching, driven by the same whip, subject to the same brutal quotas. And after a day of this back-breaking fieldwork, your toil does not end. You return to the slave quarters to face what was considered women's work, preparing the meager evening meal for your family, if you have one, mending tattered clothes, tending to children, yours and perhaps those of others, attempting to create some semblance of order and cleanliness in your squalid, overcrowded hut. There is no respite, no division of labor that lightens your load because of your gender. Your enslavement often means a double burden. But the most profound and constant terror that stalks your existence as an enslaved woman is the absolute lack of autonomy over your own body, particularly in the face of sexual exploitation. You are property. Your master, his sons, the overseers, or any white man with a flicker of power over you can, and often do, view your body as theirs for the taking. Rape is not a crime when perpetrated against an enslaved woman. It is a common, almost institutionalized aspect of your oppression, a tool of terror, domination, and the assertion of absolute ownership. There is no one to appeal to, no law to protect you. Resistance can mean a savage beating, torture, or even death. The psychological trauma of this constant threat, this lived reality of sexual violence, is immeasurable, a deep, festering wound on your soul. And then there is the twisted, horrifying logic of breeding. In a system that views human beings as livestock, your fertility is a valuable asset to your master. You might be forced into unions with enslaved men, not out of love or choice, but because your master desires more slaves, more increase to his human property. Or you might be subjected to the master's own attentions for the same purpose, bearing children who are his by blood but are born, like you, into his ownership. The children you bear are not yours. They belong to your master from the moment of their conception. Motherhood in bondage is a symphony of agony and fierce, desperate love. Pregnancy brings no relief from your harsh labor. You are often forced to work in the fields until the very day you give birth, and expected to return shortly thereafter, your infant perhaps left in the care of an older enslaved woman or a slightly older child while you toil. You nurse your baby in snatched moments, your heart aching with a love that is terrifying in its vulnerability. You look at your child, this perfect, innocent being, and know that their future is one of chains, of whips, of endless, unrewarded labor, of being owned, bought, and sold like an animal. This knowledge is a constant, bitter poison, your greatest fear, the one that haunts your waking hours and your fitful sleep, is the threat of separation. The slave system has no regard for familial bonds. Your husband, if you have been allowed such a semblance of family, can be sold away. Your children, your precious children whom you have nurtured against all odds, can be torn from your arms and sold to a distant plantation, never to be seen again, their cries echoing in your ears for the rest of your days. This arbitrary, cruel severing of the most fundamental human ties is perhaps the most devastatingly effective tool of psychological torture in the enslaver's arsenal. If you are chosen to be a house slave, working in the master's great house, your material conditions might seem superficially better than those of the field hands. You might have slightly better food, cast-off clothing from the mistress, shelter from the worst of the elements. But this proximity to the master's family, brings its own unique set of torments. You are under constant, suffocating surveillance, your every word and action scrutinized. You are subject to the whims, the moods, the petty cruelties of every member of the white family, from the master and mistress down to their spoiled children. And your vulnerability to sexual harassment and abuse is often even greater in the confines of the house, where you are a constant, accessible presence. The mistress of the house, too, can be a source of particular cruelty, her jealousy, frustration, or simple sadism often vented upon the enslaved women under her control. Yet, even in this abyss, you find ways to endure, to resist, to affirm your humanity. You create networks of support with other enslaved women, sharing burdens, offering comfort, protecting each other's children as best you can. You pass down stories, songs, and traditions from your African homeland, a fragile thread of cultural memory. You might practice small acts of defiance, a feigned illness, a deliberately slowed pace of work, stealing food to better nourish your children, reclaiming what is rightfully yours. And you hold on to love, however perilous, for your children, for your partner, for your community, as an act of profound spiritual resistance against a system designed to crush your very soul. But the daily reality is one of profound suckiness, amplified by your gender. Your body is a site of labor, a vessel for forced reproduction, an object for the gratification of your enslavers. Your emotional life is a constant battle against grief, fear, and rage. You are denied the basic dignities of womanhood, motherhood, and personhood. Your flesh is scorned, your choices non-existent, your future a bleak horizon of unrelenting servitude. And as you watch your daughter grow, you are faced with the heartbreaking knowledge that unless something changes, this catalog of special terrors will be her inheritance too. You are an enslaved woman, your body and your children deemed the property of another. Your days a grueling testament to the special terrors reserved for your gender within the brutal machinery of plantation. Slavery, the whip, the field, the master's lust, the constant threat of separation from your loved ones. These are the contours of your daily hell. Yet, even in this abyss, even when every institutional force is aligned to crush your spirit and deny your humanity, something stubbornly, fiercely, refuses to be extinguished. That something is the human need for connection, for meaning, for community, and for resistance, however small or perilous those acts might be. After the back-breaking labor of the day is done, after the overseer's horn has finally sounded its grudging release, you retreat with your fellow enslaved people to the slave quarters. This collection of crude, overcrowded cabins, reeking of sweat, smoke, and unwashed bodies, is your prison, yes. But it is also, paradoxically, the only space where you can begin to reclaim a sliver of yourselves, to forge a world within the world, a fragile sanctuary built on shared suffering and shared resilience. Here, in the brief, exhausted hours between dusk and the pre-dawn summons back to the fields, life, in its most fundamental forms, persists. Family, that most basic human unit, is a concept your enslavers seek to control and dismantle for their own profit, yet you fight to preserve it with a tenacious, heartbreaking ferocity. Though your unions are not legally recognized, though your children are born the property of your master, you strive to create families. You find partners, perhaps sharing a pallet in a crowded cabin, offering each other what solace and support you can in a world designed to break you. The love for your children is a burning, protective fire, a source of both profound joy and unimaginable pain. You teach them the songs and stories of your ancestors, if you can remember them, whispered in the darkness. You teach them the brutal rules of survival in this new world, how to appear subservient, how to avoid the overseer's anger, how to endure the unendurable. And you pray, with a desperate fervor, that they might somehow be spared the worst of what you have known. Extended kin networks, often informal, arise, an aunt or uncle, not necessarily a blood relation, who looks out for orphan children, an elder who shares wisdom and mediates disputes. These are the threads that bind your fractured community together. Culture becomes a lifeline, a secret language of survival and identity. In the relative privacy of the quarters, or during clandestine gatherings in the woods beyond the fields. The rhythms of Africa, though muted and transformed, refuse to die. Music is everywhere. You create instruments from whatever comes to hand: a hollowed gourd for a drum, stretched animal skins, rattling seed pods. Call and response songs. Their melodies often mournful, their lyrics filled with double meanings. Encoded messages of sorrow, hope, or defiance echo in the night. Dance, too, is a powerful release, a way to reconnect with your body, so often not your own during the workday, to express emotions too profound for words, to feel a moment of collective joy or catharsis, even under the shadow of the lash. Storytelling is a vital act of preservation and resistance. Folktales, perhaps featuring a clever, trickster animal like Biara rabbit who outwits larger, more powerful foes, are told and retold. These stories are not just entertainment. They are vehicles for cultural memory, for teaching lessons about survival, for subtly critiquing the injustices of your enslavement, and for keeping alive a sense of wit and agency in a system designed to render you powerless. Religion, too, becomes a powerful force. While your masters might impose their own Christian faith upon you, often in a form that emphasizes obedience and subservience, you and your community frequently blend these new teachings with the spiritual traditions of your homelands. This syncretism creates vibrant, unique forms of worship. Secret prayer meetings, often held deep in the woods or in a secluded cabin, become profound expressions of faith and communal solidarity. Here, you can pray for deliverance, for strength, for justice, in your own way, in your own words, sometimes. Incorporating African deities, spirits, and ritual practices, the figure of Moses leading his people out of bondage becomes a powerful symbol of hope. The promise of an afterlife where there is no suffering, no masters, no whips, offers a desperately needed solace. And then there is the daily, often invisible, war of resistance. Not the grand, doomed revolts that occasionally erupt and are always brutally crushed, but the myriad small ways you assert your humanity and chip away at the master's absolute control. You might engage in a slowdown, deliberately working at a less-than-killing pace, a subtle but effective way to reclaim some of your time and energy. You might feign illness to gain a precious day of rest, or pretend not to understand confusing or particularly onerous commands. Tools accidentally break. Fences mysteriously fall into disrepair. Stealing food from the master's smokehouse or pantry, which you and your community rightly see as reclaiming a tiny portion of the wealth your stolen labor produces, is a common act of both survival and defiance. You develop intricate networks to share information, to warn each other of danger, to support those who are sick or have been punished. You strive to maintain your personal dignity in small ways, keeping your meager living space as clean as possible, mending your ragged clothes with care, showing kindness and compassion to your fellow enslaved, even when your own suffering is immense. Running away, the dream of freedom, is the ultimate act of individual resistance, though fraught with extreme peril. The slave patrols, the brutal punishments for recapture, flogging, branding, mutilation, being sold further south into even harsher conditions, the unfamiliar and often hostile terrain. All these make escape a desperate gamble. Yet, some still take it, seeking refuge in remote swamps or mountains, forming marooned communities of runaways who carve out a precarious, hunted existence, or trying to make their way north towards the promise of freedom. These sparks in the darkness, the love of family, the solace of community, the resilience of culture, the daily acts of resistance, the desperate hope for freedom. These are what keep you human in a system designed to reduce you to a beast of burden. They do not, cannot, erase the profound, soul-destroying suckiness of your enslavement, but they are a testament to the unquenchable fire of the human spirit, its refusal to be entirely extinguished, even in the deepest, most oppressive night. And it is this spirit that allows you to endure, to survive, and to pass on the hope, however faint, that one day the lash will fall silent and the chains will be broken. You have forged fragile bonds of family and community within the suffocating confines of the slave quarters. You have found sparks of cultural resilience in story and song, and perhaps even small, daily acts of resistance against the relentless grind of your enslavement. These are the testaments to your enduring human spirit, but hovering over every aspect of your existence, from the moment you draw breath in the morning until you collapse into exhausted sleep, is an invisible, yet ironclad, framework of oppression. The law of the land, the so-called slave codes. These are not laws designed to protect you, to offer you recourse, or to acknowledge your humanity. No, these are chains of parchment, meticulously crafted to define you as property, to legitimize your master's absolute dominion, and to ensure the perpetuation of the brutal system that holds you captive. Imagine trying to navigate a world where the very concept of justice, as it applies to free people, simply does not apply to you. You live outside its protection, a permanent alien in the land your forced labor enriches. The slave codes, enacted by the colonial assemblies and later by state legislatures, are the legal bedrock of your misery. Their primary, overarching purpose is to establish one fundamental, horrifying truth. You are not a person in the eyes of the law. You are chattel. You are movable property, like a horse, a cow, or a piece of furniture, to be bought, sold, leased, mortgaged, inherited, or disposed of entirely at your master's whim. Your life, your body, your labor, none of it belongs to you. It is all his. This legal definition of you as property underpins every other horror of your enslavement. Your master is granted almost limitless authority over your person. He has the legal right to demand your labor, from sunup to sundown, and often beyond, without compensation. He has the right to inflict physical punishment for any perceived infraction or for no reason at all. The whip, the branding iron, the stocks, the iron collar. These are not just instruments of an overseer's cruelty. They are tools explicitly or implicitly sanctioned by the law to maintain discipline and extract obedience. If your master or his overseer were to beat you to the point of death, it would rarely be considered murder. At worst, it might be viewed as the destruction of property, a financial loss to the owner, but not a crime against your person, because, legally, you barely have one that the slave codes meticulously strip away any semblance of human rights or civil liberties. You are forbidden to own property yourself. Any meager possessions you might acquire, a small pot, a bit of cloth, a chicken if your master allows you to keep one, are not legally yours and can be taken away at any moment. You are forbidden to carry weapons, even for self-defense. An enslaved person who dares to strike a white person, even to protect their own life or the life of a loved one, faces an almost certain sentence of extreme torture and death. Learning to read or write is a dangerous, often explicitly illegal, act. The enslavers understand the power of literacy, the power to communicate, to organize, to access ideas of freedom and rebellion. Therefore, they strive to keep you in a state of enforced ignorance. Your mind is shackled as your body. You are forbidden to gather in groups, especially without white supervision, lest you plot an escape or an uprising. Your movements are severely restricted. You cannot leave your plantation or travel without a written pass from your master. Even your spiritual life is often controlled, with independent religious meetings viewed with suspicion that in a court of law, your voice is silenced. You cannot testify against a white person. If a white person commits a crime against you, theft, assault, even rape, you have no legal recourse. Your word means nothing against theirs. The entire judicial system is designed to protect the rights of the property owner, not the property itself. Your family life, that fragile sanctuary you try to build in the slave quarters, has no legal standing. The slave codes do not recognize marriage between enslaved people. Your union, however deep your love and commitment, is at the master's pleasure. He can separate you from your spouse, your children, your parents, your siblings by selling any one of you to a different owner, often to a distant plantation from which you will never return. The agony of these forced separations, the screams of mothers as their children are torn from their arms at the auction block, these are the direct, legal consequence of your status as chattel. Even the protections that sometimes appear in slave codes, clauses about providing adequate food, clothing, or shelter, or limitations on excessive cruelty, are almost universally a sham. They are rarely enforced, easily circumvented, and designed more to present a veneer of humane concern to the outside world, or to assuage the consciences of some enslavers, than to offer any genuine relief to the enslaved. The reality on the ground is the master's will, backed by the overseer's whip and the terrifying apparatus of the slave patrols. These patrols, often made up of poor white men who gain a sense of power and authority from terrorizing the enslaved population, are the enforcers of the codes, empowered to stop, question, and brutally punish any enslaved person found outside their plantation without a pass, or any gathering deemed suspicious. Living under these chains of parchment means existing in a state of constant vulnerability, where your life is governed by the arbitrary whims of another human being, where you have no rights, no legal personhood, no avenue for redress. It means knowing that your deepest human connections can be shattered in an instant, that your body can be violated without consequence, that your labor can be stolen without recompense, all under the full sanction and protection of the law of the land. This legal framework is not just an abstract set of rules. It is the very architecture of your daily suffering, a constant, crushing reminder of your dehumanized state, and a core reason why your existence as a slave is one of unending systemic suckiness. Every aspect of your life is legislated into misery. You live under the iron fist of the slave codes, a legal framework meticulously designed to strip you of your humanity and solidify your status as mere property. You have witnessed, and perhaps participated in, the quiet acts of cultural resilience and daily resistance that provide fleeting sparks in the overwhelming darkness of your enslaved existence. But what happens as the years of unremitting toil, meager sustenance, and brutal conditions inevitably take their toll on your physical form? What is your fate when your body, the primary source of your master's profit, begins to falter, to weaken, to wear out? In the cold calculus of chattel slavery, there is little room for compassion, and the twilight years of an enslaved person are often fraught with a new set of anxieties and profound miseries. Imagine your body, once strong, from the forced labor of your youth and prime, now beginning to bear the undeniable marks of a life lived under the lash and the sun. Your joints ache with a chronic, gnawing pain from years of stooping in the fields, hauling heavy loads, or standing for endless hours in the sweltering heat of the sugar-boiling house. Your back is a landscape of old whip scars, some healed into thick, raised welts, others still tender to the touch, a permanent testament to the master's discipline. Your hands, if you haven't already lost fingers to accidents in the mill or to frostbite from inadequate winter clothing, are gnarled and stiff. Your eyesight might be failing, your teeth, if any remain, loose and aching. The seasoning sicknesses of your arrival may have left you with lingering weaknesses and new ailments, born of malnutrition and unsanitary living conditions, are constant companions, persistent coughs, debilitating fevers, weeping sores that refuse to heal. In this system, your value is inextricably linked to your capacity for labor. As that capacity diminishes, so too does your perceived worth in the eyes of your master. You become acutely aware of this shift. The overseer's gaze might linger on you a little longer, his expression a mixture of impatience and cold assessment. Your daily work quota, once achievable with supreme effort, now seems an impossible mountain to climb. The whip, which perhaps fell less frequently on you when you were a prime field hand, might now crack with renewed, impatient vigor if you slow your pace or falter in your tasks. What happens when you fall seriously ill, or when old age truly begins to cripple you? There are no gentle retirements, no pensions, no guarantees of care in your declining years. Medical attention, if provided at all, is rudimentary and often aimed more at getting you back to work quickly than at genuinely alleviating your suffering or curing your ailment. You might be relegated to a sick house, often little more than a squalid, isolated hut where the seriously ill and dying are left to their fate, tended, if at all, by other elderly or infirm enslaved people who have few resources themselves. Your rations, already meager, might be further reduced as you are no longer considered a productive asset. The fear of becoming useless is a profound and terrifying one. You have seen what happens to those who can no longer contribute to the master's profits. Some are simply neglected, left to waste away in their cabins, a burden grudgingly borne until death finally claims them. Others, however, face an even more dreaded fate, being sold south or sold off to a new master known for working his slaves to death in even harsher conditions. As your strength wanes, the horrifying possibility that you will be torn from the fragile community you have built, from the children or grandchildren who represent your only earthly solace, and shipped off to die alone in some distant, unknown hellhole, becomes a constant, chilling anxiety. This internal slave trade, the buying and selling of human beings within the slaveholding territories, is a perpetual threat, breaking families and shattering communities with ruthless efficiency. And it often targets the aging or the troublesome, sometimes in a twisted parody of freedom. A master might manumit an enslaved person who has become completely incapacitated by old age or chronic illness. This is rarely an act of kindness. More often, it is a cynical way for the owner to relieve himself of the burden of feeding and housing someone who can no longer generate profit. You are cast out, freed into utter destitution, with no means of support, no place to go, often to die quickly of starvation or exposure, a final act of abandonment. Even if you avoid being sold or cast out, your final years are likely to be ones of continued, albeit perhaps lighter, toil. There is rarely a true cessation of labor until you are physically incapable of movement. You might be assigned tasks deemed suitable for the elderly or infirm, minding the very young children in the slave quarters while their mothers are forced to work in the fields, tending a small vegetable patch, mending clothes or fishing nets, sweeping the yard or carding cotton. Any contribution, however small, is expected until your last breath. The community of the enslaved, your brothers and sisters in bondage, often provide the only true care and compassion you receive in these twilight years. They might share their own meager rations with you, help you with your tasks, tend to your sores, or simply sit with you, offering the comfort of human presence. They will be the ones to mourn you when you die, to prepare your body for burial, as best they can, to remember your stories and your struggles. This solidarity, born of shared suffering, is a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit, but it cannot erase the fundamental injustice and cruelty of a system that deems you worthless once your capacity for forced labor is exhausted. Your life has been a relentless extraction of your strength, your youth, your very being, all for the enrichment of another. And as your body finally succumbs to the accumulated toll of that stolen life, there is no reward, no rest, no acknowledgement of your decades of unrequited toil. There is only the cold indifference of the master, the fear of being cast aside, and the grim reality that even in sickness and old age, your primary value is determined by your quickly diminishing capacity to serve. This is the ultimate suckiness of your decline, to have given everything, and in the end, to be regarded as nothing more than a worn-out tool, ready for the scrap heap. You have endured the unendurable. You survived the horrors of capture, the living hell of the Middle Passage, the brutal seasoning that sought to grind your spirit into dust, and the relentless daily toil of plantation life. You may have even carved out a fragile semblance of existence within the slave quarters, found love, had children, forged bonds of kinship with fellow sufferers. But in this world built upon your stolen life, there is no true sanctuary, no lasting security. For hovering over you, a constant, chilling specter, is the ever-present threat of being sold again, torn from whatever tenuous roots you've managed to put down, and cast once more into the terrifying unknown. This is the reality of the internal slave trade, a vast, cruel machinery that treated you not just as property, but as an endlessly transferable commodity. Imagine the gnawing anxiety that permeates your every day. Your master, the man who legally owns your body and the bodies of your loved ones, might fall into debt. He might die, his estate to be divided amongst his heirs. He might simply decide that you are more valuable as cash than as labor, or that he wishes to acquire different stock. Or perhaps you have committed some perceived infraction or are deemed troublesome, and being sold away is your punishment. The reasons are myriad, often arbitrary, and entirely beyond your control. One day you are toiling in familiar fields, surrounded by familiar faces. The next, you could be chained in a coffle, marching towards a distant market and an unknown master. This internal slave trade, particularly in places like the American South where the expansion of cotton cultivation in the Deep South created an insatiable demand for labor, became a vast and horrifically efficient business. In regions like the Upper South, where tobacco lands were becoming exhausted, some planters turned to breeding enslaved people specifically for sale to the burgeoning cotton and sugar frontiers. You, as a woman, might be valued for your reproductive capacity, forced to bear child after child, only to see them grow and then be sold away from you like so many calves or lambs. The anguish of a mother whose children are treated as a cash crop is a depth of suffering almost impossible to fathom. The journey itself, when you are sold, is often a grim echo of the horrors of the Middle Passage, albeit overland or via coastal shipping rather than across the vast Atlantic. You might be marched for hundreds of miles in chained coffles, prodded along by slave traders, men often notorious for their brutality and lack of even the rudimentary self-interest that might have motivated a master to keep his property in reasonable condition. Food and water are scarce, the pace relentless, the whip ever-present. Or you might be crammed into the hold of a coastal vessel, enduring conditions of filth and overcrowding that rival those of the transatlantic slavers. Disease, exhaustion, and despair claim many lives on these internal journeys. And then you arrive at another slave market, perhaps in a bustling port city like New Orleans or Charleston, or a smaller regional town. The hideous spectacle of the auction block is replayed. Once again, you are stripped, prodded, inspected like an animal. Your teeth are examined, your limbs felt, your back checked for whip scars, a sign of resilience to some buyers, of rebelliousness. To others, your value is debated openly, your human dignity utterly disregarded. You might be sold individually or as part of a lot. The desperate hope that you might somehow stay with a spouse, a child, a sibling, is almost always cruelly extinguished. Families are shattered with a casual brutality that underscores the system's fundamental inhumanity. The screams of those being torn from their loved ones are the soundtrack of these markets, a chorus of unending grief. Being sold down the river or to the sugar islands often meant being sold into an even harsher, more deadly regime of labor than you had previously known. The life expectancy on a Louisiana sugar plantation or in the expanding cotton fields of Mississippi and Alabama was notoriously short. The work was more intense, the climate often more brutal, the overseers more driven by the relentless pursuit of profit. To be sold to such a place was often seen as a death sentence. The psychological impact of this constant instability, this ever-present threat of sale and separation, is devastating. How can you form deep attachments when you know they can be ripped apart at any moment? How can you invest in your small community, your fragile family, when the master's whim or financial misfortune can scatter you all to the winds? It breeds a pervasive sense of insecurity, a deep-seated trauma that affects your ability to trust, to love, to hope. Every rumor of the master's debts, every unfamiliar visitor to the plantation, every sideways glance from the overseer can send a jolt of terror through you. Is today the day? Will you be the one chosen? Will your children be taken? Even the most privileged enslaved people, skilled artisans, trusted house servants, are not immune. Their skills might make them more valuable, but that value can still be cashed in. A master's death often means the entire household. Staff is sold off to settle the estate. Their years of service, their intimate knowledge of the family, counting for nothing. Sometimes, you see others from your plantation being led away, their faces masks of despair. You know you might be next. The fear is a constant, corrosive acid, eating away at any small comfort or sense of belonging you might have managed to carve out. This perpetual commodification, this endless cycle of being bought and sold, of having your life and your relationships subject to the cold, hard calculus of the marketplace, is one of the most insidious and soul-destroying aspects of your enslavement. It reinforces, day after day, year after year, that you are not seen as a human being, but as an object, a thing, whose only purpose is to generate wealth for others. easily disposed of when you are no longer deemed sufficiently profitable or convenient. This constant, looming terror of the auction block, the coffle chain, and the forced separation from all you hold dear is a central, agonizing reason why your life as a slave is an unending torment. You have witnessed the cold, legal architecture of your oppression in the slave codes, a system designed to brand you as less than human, as mere chattel. You have seen how the internal slave trade can shatter families and communities with the callous indifference of a scattered deck of cards, underscoring the perpetual insecurity of your existence. But within the vast, brutal landscape of plantation slavery, were there different shades of hell? Did the nature of your forced labor, the place where you toiled, significantly alter the suckiness of your lot? Let's explore the perceived divide between the house slave and the field slave, and whether one offered any true respite from the fundamental horror of being owned. For most enslaved people, life means the field. From before the sun crests the horizon until long after it has sunk below it, you are driven into the vast expanses of sugarcane, cotton, tobacco, or rice. This is a world of relentless, back-breaking physical toil under a sky that offers either blistering heat or chilling rain. You are part of a gang, men and women alike, moving in unison, planting, hoeing, weeding, harvesting, your body straining, your muscles screaming, all under the watchful eye and ever-ready lash of the overseer or the driver. Your hands are calloused, cracked, often bleeding from the sharp edges of cane leaves or the prickly cotton bolls. The sun beats down mercilessly, and thirst is a constant torment. Your clothing is coarse and minimal, your food insufficient to truly replenish the energy torn from you each day. This is the raw, brutal engine room of the plantation economy, and you are its disposable fuel. The suckiness here is visceral, immediate, a daily assault on your physical being. But then there are those who serve in the great house, the master's dwelling. From the outside, or perhaps from the perspective of a field hand gazing towards its relative comfort, this might seem like a privileged position. The house slave, the cook, the butler, the valet, the lady's maid, the mammy, the coachman, often has access to slightly better food, the leftovers from the master's table. Though these two can be meager and inconsistent, cast-off clothing from the white family, finer than your rough Osnaburg, and shelter within the main house or in slightly better appointed cabins nearby, protected from the worst of the elements. The physical labor, while still demanding, might not always be the bone-crushing toil of the fields if you are a house slave. You inhabit a world of suffocating proximity to your enslavers. You learn their habits, their moods, their secrets. You become intimately familiar with their voices, their scents, the rustle of their fine clothes. This intimacy, however, is a dangerous illusion. You are under constant, unblinking scrutiny. Every word you utter, every glance, every task you perform is judged. A spilled drink, a poorly polished piece of silver, a moment of perceived slowness or insolence can bring swift and often disproportionate punishment. A sharp cuff, a stinging slap, or even a full flogging if the master or mistress is in a particularly foul temper. The mistress of the house, who might present a facade of gentility to the outside world, can be a particular source of torment. Her frustrations, her jealousies, especially if the master has taken a fancy to you or another enslaved woman in the house, her boredom, can all be vented upon you with impunity. Her demands are often endless, her standards impossible to meet, her moods as changeable as the weather. You are expected to be invisible, yet always available, silent, yet perfectly obedient, anticipating her every need before it is even expressed. The psychological toll of this constant performance, this tightrope walk of subservience, is immense, and for enslaved women and girls in the house, the proximity to the white men of the family, the master, his sons, his guests, the overseers, who might have access to the house, brings the ever-present, heightened threat of sexual harassment and rape. There is no safe space, no locked door that can protect you. Your body is considered theirs to command, and resistance is almost unthinkable, often leading to even more brutal reprisals, not just against you, but potentially against your loved ones in the field. The supposed privilege of house service. often means being trapped in a gilded cage where your vulnerability is an open secret, a constant, terrifying reality. While you might not suffer the same degree of physical exposure as a field hand, your days are still long and arduous. You are up before dawn to light the fires, prepare the morning meal, and attend to the needs of the awakening household. You work late into the night, cleaning, mending, serving, always on call. There is no clear demarcation between work and rest. The emotional labor is also exhausting. Maintaining a pleasant, subservient demeanor, suppressing your own anger, fear, and sorrow, all while being treated as less than human. Furthermore, the perceived advantages of house service can create rifts within the enslaved community. Field hands might view house slaves with suspicion or resentment, seeing them as favored, perhaps even as informants for the master. House slaves, in turn, might look down upon the field hands, internalizing some of the master's disdain. These divisions, often deliberately fostered by the enslavers, further weaken the bonds of solidarity among the enslaved. Ultimately, whether you toil under the sun-scorched sky of the cane field or in the suffocating, perfumed air of the master's parlor, the fundamental reality of your existence remains the same. You are enslaved. You are property. Your life is not your own. You can be bought, sold, beaten, bred, and worked to death, regardless of whether your chains are literal iron or the more subtle, but no less binding, constraints of domestic servitude. The gilded cage might offer a different view, perhaps a slightly softer palette, but it is still a cage, and the chains, though perhaps less visible, are just as real, just as heavy. The suckiness of your lot is absolute, differing only in the particular flavor of its misery. And the dream of freedom, the desperate yearning to be master of your own body and soul, burns just as fiercely whether you are wielding a hoe or polishing silver. You exist in a world where your every breath, your every movement, your very body, and the children you bear are deemed the property of another. Whether you toil under the blistering sun of the fields or navigate the suffocating intimacy of the master's house, the chains of enslavement, visible or invisible, define your reality. We've explored the relentless labor, the squalid conditions, the casual brutality, the systemic dehumanization. But even in the deepest, darkest pit of this despair, does a flicker of something else persist? The answer, for countless enslaved souls, was a defiant, dangerous, and often tragically elusive yes, the dream of freedom. This yearning for liberty is not an abstract concept. It is a primal, visceral need, a desperate clawing towards the light from the crushing weight of your bondage. It whispers to you in the dead of night, in the brief moments of exhausted rest between one day's torment and the next. It is fueled by the memory of a life before capture, if you are first-generation enslaved, or by the stories passed down from elders, or simply by the innate human refusal to be entirely broken, to accept that this hell is all there is. But how? In a system so ruthlessly designed to prevent it, could you even begin to grasp at such a dream? The paths to freedom were few, narrow, and almost invariably fraught with extreme peril. One such path, though rare and often dependent on the unpredictable whims of your enslaver, was manumission. Your master might, in his last will and testament, grant freedom to a favored or long-serving enslaved person, perhaps out of a flicker of deathbed conscience or a desire to appear benevolent. Or, in exceptionally rare cases, an enslaved person might be manumitted for an act of extraordinary loyalty or service, such as saving the master's life. But this was entirely at the master's discretion, a gift bestowed, not a right earned. Then there was the agonizingly difficult path of self-purchase. If you possessed a particular skill, perhaps you were a gifted blacksmith, cooper, or seamstress, your master might allow you to hire out your own time, performing work for others and keeping a tiny fraction of the earnings. Over many, many years of scrimping, saving, and enduring countless deprivations, it was sometimes, just sometimes, possible to accumulate enough to buy your own freedom or that of a loved one. But this required not only superhuman perseverance and luck, but also a master willing to agree to the sale, and one who wouldn't simply raise the price exorbitantly or renege on the deal at the last moment. And even if you succeeded, the price was often your entire productive life, leaving you old and worn out by the time freedom was finally achieved. For the vast majority, however, the only conceivable path to freedom was the most dangerous of all: escape. The decision to run was not taken lightly. It meant leaving behind everything and everyone you knew: your family, your community, the fragile bonds of kinship that offered your only solace. It meant stepping out alone into a hostile world, with no resources, no papers, and the constant, terrifying threat of recapture. If you chose this desperate gamble, your journey would be one of extreme hardship and unceasing fear. You would travel by night, hiding by day in dense forests, fetid swamps, or remote caves. Hunger and thirst would be your constant companions. You would have to navigate unfamiliar terrain, evade the slave patrols with their brutal dogs and keen-eyed trackers, and be wary of every stranger, as betrayal for a reward was common. The natural world itself, with its wild animals and harsh elements, posed its own set of dangers. Where would you even run to? In the American South, the dream was often north, towards the Free States, or later, Canada. This journey could be hundreds, even thousands, of miles, each step fraught with peril. You might receive help from the clandestine network known as the Underground Railroad, a courageous chain of free blacks, Quakers, and other abolitionists who risked their own lives and liberty to provide safe houses, food, and guidance to fugitive slaves. But this network was not everywhere, and reaching it was a monumental challenge in itself, in the Caribbean islands or parts of South America. Escape often meant fleeing into the remote, mountainous interiors or dense jungles to join or form maroon communities. These were settlements of escaped slaves who carved out a precarious, independent existence, often engaging in guerrilla warfare against the colonial authorities to defend their freedom. Life in a maroon community was one of constant vigilance, self-sufficiency, and armed resistance, a defiant but perpetually threatened outpost of liberty. The consequences of failed escape were horrific, designed to deter others. If caught, you would be subjected to a savage flogging, often hundreds of lashes that could leave you crippled or dead. You might be branded on the face or chest with an R for runaway. Iron collars with bells or heavy chains and weights might be permanently affixed to your body to impede future attempts. Mutilation, such as the severing of an Achilles tendon, hobbling, or the amputation of toes, was not unheard of. And almost invariably, you would be sold away from your home plantation, separated from any remaining family, likely to an even harsher master in a distant, more brutal region. Yet, despite these terrifying risks, countless enslaved people chose to run. The dream of freedom, however slim, however dangerous, was a testament to their unbreakable spirit. Every successful escape, every story whispered in the slave quarters of someone who made it north or joined a maroon settlement, became a legend, a flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. These acts of defiance, these desperate flights towards liberty, were a constant thorn in the side of the slave system, a powerful assertion of your humanity and your unquenchable desire to be free. Even if you did achieve some form of freedom, whether through manumission or escape, your life in a society still largely built on slavery and racial prejudice was often far from secure. As a freed person of color, you faced discrimination, limited economic opportunities, the constant threat of being kidnapped and re-enslaved, and a legal system that still offered you few protections. Freedom was not a magical end to suffering, but it was, at its core, the right to own yourself, to direct your own life, to make your own choices, a right so fundamental that you and countless others were willing to risk everything, even a torturous death, to reclaim it. This elusive dream, this dangerous spark, was one of a handful of things that made your utterly wretched existence just barely, sometimes, endurable. You have glimpsed the elusive, treacherous paths towards freedom, the desperate flights and hidden maroon communities that represent a defiant flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness of your enslavement. But for you, and the vast majority of your brothers and sisters in bondage, physical escape remains an almost unattainable dream. In a world where your body is owned, your labor stolen, and your family perpetually threatened, where do you turn for solace, for meaning, for the strength to endure another day under the lash? For many, the answer, complex and often contradictory, lies in the realm of faith, a spiritual landscape shaped by the traditions of your African homelands, the imposed religion of your enslavers, and the unique, resilient synthesis you forge. Between them, your masters, more often than not, will attempt to impose their own Christian faith upon you. They might build a simple chapel on the plantation, or require your attendance at services led by a white preacher or even by the master himself. The version of Christianity you are taught here is often a carefully curated one, emphasizing those biblical passages that preach obedience, subservience, and the acceptance of your earthly lot. You hear sermons on slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, while the more challenging messages of justice, equality before God, or liberation are conveniently omitted or twisted. The Bible, in their hands, becomes another tool of control, another chain to bind your spirit as surely as iron shackles bind your limbs. They seek to make you a docile, hard-working, and uncomplaining Christian slave, content in the knowledge that your reward will be in the afterlife, provided you serve your master faithfully in this one. But you are not a passive recipient of this imposed faith. You listen, you observe, and you often find your own meanings, your own sources of power, within the very stories and symbols they offer. The figure of Jesus, a suffering servant, a man of sorrows acquainted with grief, unjustly accused and brutally executed by a powerful empire, might resonate deeply with your own experience. His message of love, compassion for the downtrodden, and the promise of ultimate justice and a kingdom where the last shall be first can offer a profound, if often secret, consolation. The story of Moses leading his people out of bondage in Egypt becomes a potent, if dangerously hopeful, metaphor for your own yearning for freedom, away from the watchful eyes of the master and overseer, in the dead of night, deep in the woods. Or in a secluded cabin, you create your own sacred spaces, your invisible church or hush harbor. Here, the worship is yours. You might have your own preachers, often an elder in the community, a man or woman gifted with spiritual insight and oratorical power, who interprets the scriptures in ways that speak directly to your suffering and your aspirations. The services are filled with a raw, emotional fervor, call and response singing, ecstatic prayer, testimonies of faith and endurance. Here, you can weep, you can shout, you can dance, you can express the full range of your human emotions, finding a collective strength and spiritual release that is denied to you in the Master's controlled chapel and in these secret gatherings. The Christian faith often blends, consciously or unconsciously, with the retained spiritual traditions of your African homelands. The concept of a distant, all-powerful creator God might merge with beliefs in a pantheon of lesser deities or nature spirits. Ancestral veneration might find new expression. Rituals involving drumming, dance, spirit possession, and water immersion. Baptism can take on a hybrid character, imbued with both African and Christian meanings. Music is absolutely central. You create the spirituals, songs of immense power and beauty, their melodies often drawn from African musical forms, their lyrics a rich tapestry of biblical imagery, personal sorrow, communal hope, and frequently coded messages. A song about "Steal Away to Jesus" might be a genuine expression of religious devotion, but it could also be a signal for a secret meeting or even a planned escape. "Wade in the Water" might offer spiritual comfort, but also practical advice for runaways on how to elude the slave catcher's dogs. This syncretic faith becomes a profound source of resilience. It offers you a moral framework that stands in stark opposition to the master's claims of absolute ownership. It tells you that you are a child of God, that your soul is precious, that your suffering is seen and understood by a higher power, and that earthly injustice will not last forever. It provides a sense of community, of shared identity and purpose, binding you together in the face of a system designed to isolate and dehumanize you. It gives you a language to articulate your pain, your anger, your hope. Of course, the practice of your own, authentic faith is fraught with danger. If your secret meetings are discovered, the punishment can be savage, floggings, the the selling off of leaders, the banning of all gatherings. The master fears any form of independent organization, any expression of spiritual autonomy among his enslaved people, rightly seeing it as a potential seedbed for rebellion. Yet, you persist, driven by a spiritual hunger that the master's watered-down, control-oriented version of Christianity cannot satisfy. Even the master's more public religious observances can be a source of bitter irony. You might be forced to sit or stand at the back of the white folks' church, listening to a preacher extol Christian virtues of love, charity, and mercy, while knowing that these virtues are systematically denied to you. You see your enslavers taking communion, professing their devotion to a God of justice, while their whips still crack, their chains still bind, and their profits are still wrung from your stolen labor and your broken body. This glaring hypocrisy is not lost on you, and it fuels a deep, often unspoken, critique of the master's religion, even as you might find your own path to solace and meaning within the broader Christian story. So, faith in your enslaved world is a double-edged sword. It is used by your oppressors as a tool of control, a justification for your bondage. But it is also seized by you, transformed, and imbued with your own experiences and aspirations, becoming a powerful instrument of spiritual survival, communal cohesion, and a quiet, unyielding assertion of your indestructible humanity. In the songs you sing, the prayers you whisper, the stories you tell, you keep alive a vision of a world where you are more than property, where your soul, at least, can soar free. Even if your body remains in chains, you have navigated the treacherous currents of faith within your enslaved world, finding both a tool of oppression in your master's hands and a profound source of solace and resistance in your own secret worship. You've seen the fleeting, dangerous glimmers of hope in the dream of escape or the rare chance of manumission. But what of the wounds that are not so visible, the scars etched not upon your back by the overseer's lash, but deep within your mind, your heart, your very soul? What is the psychological toll of being born into, or enduring a lifetime within, a system designed to crush your spirit and deny your fundamental humanity? This, perhaps, is one of the most insidious and enduring reasons why it sucked to be a slave. Imagine, first, the experience of being born into bondage. You open your eyes to a world where your mother is already enslaved, her love for you fierce but tinged with a sorrow and fear you will only later come to understand. Your first lullabies might be songs of a distant homeland you will never see, or spirituals heavy with coded messages of suffering and hope. You learn to walk, to talk, within the confines of the slave quarters, your playground the dusty earth between the crude cabins, your earliest lessons about the world learned under the shadow of the great house and the ever-present threat of the master's power. There is no moment of capture for you, no stark transition from freedom to enslavement. Bondage is the only reality you have ever known. But this does not lessen its horror. As you grow, you begin to perceive the invisible walls of your prison. You see the fear in your mother's eyes when the overseer approaches. You hear the hushed, anguished whispers when someone from your community is brutally punished or sold away. You learn, through painful experience, the myriad unwritten rules of survival: to avert your gaze, to feign ignorance, to suppress your anger, to offer an outward show of deference even when your heart seethes with rebellion. This is the mask you must learn to wear, a heavy, suffocating disguise necessary for self-preservation. The trauma is generational, a bitter inheritance passed down. Your parents or grandparents might carry the searing memories of the Middle Passage, of capture, of this seasoning. They may not speak of it openly, the pain too raw, the horrors too unspeakable. But it is there, in their haunted eyes, in their sudden silences, in the stories and songs that subtly convey the magnitude of loss and suffering. You absorb this inherited trauma, this legacy of displacement and brutality, even if you have not directly experienced its initial shock. It becomes part of your psychological DNA, a deep-seated awareness of your people's profound wounding. Your very identity is under constant assault. Your African name, if your parents dared to give you one, is likely supplanted by a European name chosen by your master, a name that disconnects you from your ancestry. Your language, your cultural traditions, your religious beliefs, all are suppressed, driven underground, practiced in secret at great risk. You are taught, overtly and subtly, that you are inferior, that your blackness is a mark of servitude, that your purpose in life is to toil for the profit of others. Internalizing these poisonous messages is a constant danger, a battle for your own sense of self-worth fought daily in the silent chambers of your heart. How do you maintain hope in a system designed to be perpetual, to crush any aspiration for a different future? For many, hope becomes a fragile, carefully nurtured thing, found in religious faith, in the love of family, in the solidarity of community, in the small acts of defiance and cultural preservation. But for others, the weight of unending bondage can lead to a profound despair, a soul-crushing fatalism. You might see individuals descend into a deep melancholy, their spirits broken, their eyes devoid of light. The rates of what we would now call depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress must have been astronomical, though there were no names for such afflictions then. Only the grim reality of minds and spirits unraveling under unbearable pressure. The constant threat of arbitrary violence and separation inflicts its own unique psychological wounds. How do you truly invest in love, in family, when you know that your spouse, your child, your sibling can be sold away from you at any moment, for any reason, or for no reason at all? This makes deep emotional connection both essential for survival and a source of potential, devastating pain. Every goodbye in the morning, as family members are sent to different tasks or fields, carries the unspoken fear that it might be the last. And then there is the burden of knowing, of seeing the world as it truly is. If you were born free and then enslaved, the memory of that freedom is a constant, agonizing torment. If you were born into slavery, the gradual awakening to the injustice of your condition, the realization that others live free while you are bound, can be a source of immense bitterness and rage, emotions you must learn to swallow, to hide, lest they bring down catastrophic punishment. You learn to read the moods of your enslavers with the acuity of a hunted animal, to anticipate their desires, their angers, their cruelties. This constant state of hypervigilance is exhausting, a never-ending performance designed to minimize pain and maximize your chances of survival. You become an expert in duplicity, in presenting a mask of compliance while your inner world seethes with unexpressed emotions. This disconnect between your outward behavior and your inner reality is a heavy psychological burden, a source of profound alienation. The scars on your soul, the invisible wounds of generations of enslavement, are as deep and as damaging as any physical lash mark. They manifest in broken families, in suppressed identities, in a legacy of trauma that can echo far beyond the formal end of slavery itself. To live a life where your very personhood is denied, where your spirit is under constant siege, where hope is a dangerous contraband, and where the weight of your ancestors' suffering is compounded by your own daily horrors. This is the profound, enduring psychological suckiness of your existence. It is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit that anyone survived such an ordeal with their sanity, let alone their humanity, intact. The scars on your soul, the invisible wounds of generations of enslavement, are as deep and as damaging as any physical lash mark. They manifest in broken families, in suppressed identities, in a legacy of trauma that can echo far beyond the formal end of slavery itself. To live a life where your very personhood is denied, where your spirit is under constant siege, where hope is a dangerous contraband, and where the weight of your ancestors' suffering is compounded by your own daily horrors. This is the profound, enduring psychological suckiness of your existence. It is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit that anyone survived such an ordeal with their sanity, let alone their humanity, intact. And so, we draw the veil on this harrowing exploration into what might well be considered the worst time in history to be born, or to be made, a slave. You have walked with me from the sunlit villages of West Africa, through the terror of capture, the unimaginable hell of the Middle Passage, the degradation of the auction block, the brutal seasoning, the relentless toil of the plantation, the special torments reserved for women, the chains of unjust laws, the despair of old age and infirmity, the perpetual threat of sale, and the flickering, desperate hopes for freedom or solace in faith. We have tried to imagine the unimaginable, to bear witness, in some small way, to the totality of an experience designed to strip away humanity itself. What, then, is the final, bitter taste of this journey? Why did it suck, with such an all-encompassing, soul-destroying totality, to be you, an enslaved person in the era of the transatlantic trade and New World plantation agriculture? It was the absolute negation of your personhood. From the moment of capture, you ceased to be an individual with a name, a family, a history, a culture, a future of your own choosing. You became property, chattel, a thing to be bought and sold, used and abused, worked until your body broke, and then discarded. Your worth was measured not in your intrinsic human value, but in your capacity to produce profit for another. Every law, every custom, every lash of the whip reinforced this brutal, dehumanizing truth that it was the relentless physical suffering. The chains that bit into your flesh, the suffocating filth of the slave ship's hold, the back-breaking labor. Under a merciless sun, the meager rations that left you perpetually hungry, the squalid living conditions that bred disease, the brutal punishments for the slightest infraction. Your body was a canvas upon which the horrors of the system were painted daily, a landscape of scars, sores, and chronic pain that was the profound psychological torment. The terror of the unknown, the grief of separation from loved ones, parents, spouses, children, sold away with the casual indifference one might show to livestock. The constant fear of arbitrary violence, the struggle to maintain a sense of self in a world that denied your identity, the gnawing anxiety of what fresh horror tomorrow might bring. It was the inherited trauma, passed down through generations, the scars on the soul that lingered long after the physical wounds had, perhaps, healed. It was the systemic nature of the cruelty. This was not just the isolated evil of a few sadistic masters. It was an entire economic, legal, and social system built upon your stolen life, your forced labor. The immense wealth of nations, the sweetness of sugar, the comfort of cotton, the pleasure of tobacco, all were built upon a foundation of your suffering, your blood, your tears. You were the unwilling, unpaid, and brutally exploited engine of a global commercial enterprise. It was the calculated destruction of your culture, your heritage. Your languages were suppressed, your religious practices forbidden or driven underground, your family structures systematically undermined. Every effort was made to erase your past, to make you a blank slate upon which the master could inscribe his ownership and his will. And yet, through it all, as we have seen, the human spirit, though battered and bruised, refused to be entirely extinguished. In the secret songs and stories, in the forged bonds of kinship and community within the slave quarters, in the syncretic faiths that blended African traditions with Christian hope, in the daily acts of quiet resistance, in the desperate flights for freedom, in all these ways, you and your fellow enslaved asserted your humanity, your dignity, your unquenchable desire for something more than the living death that was offered to you to be born into this specific time, and this particular system of slavery was to be born into a world where the odds were stacked catastrophically against your survival, your freedom, your happiness, your very sense of self. It was to be caught in the gears of a monstrous machine designed to consume your life for the profit of others. This suckiness was not a single event, but a pervasive, unending, multi-generational condition of profound suffering and injustice. As we step back from this abyss, the echoes of that stolen life, that immense human tragedy, should serve not just as a chilling historical record, but as a somber reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink and the incredible resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Your story, though fictionalized in our telling, represents the lived reality of millions, a testament to a past that must never be forgotten, lest its shadows lengthen once more. Good night.